Hi, my name is Sally Deonarinesingh, and today we're going to be talking about the contiguity principle and graphic alignment. So I want you to just take a look at this picture for a second, and we're going to give you a few seconds to take in the picture and also to line up those words with where they're supposed to go. All right, so let's go ahead and start now. Try to remember where all of those things are indicated on this picture. All right. How's it going? Okay, time. Let's move on here. So if you remembered the medulla oblongata, how many of you remembered it from Adam Sandler's Waterboy? So do you remember where it was on that picture we just saw? Let's take a look and see. Right, if you said this was the medulla oblongata, then you got it, and kudos to you. But I just want to talk to you about this for a second. How hard was it to try to line up all of those terms with where they were on the picture? You were going back and forth and trying to tie all those things together in just a very short, limited amount of time. So let's look at a better way to do this. There we go. Isn't that much easier? All right, we're gonna do the same exercise again. Take a few seconds and try to connect those terms with where they're located on the picture. How are we doing this time? All right. So, how do you think you did? Was that a little bit easier? All right. So, right now, I want you to see if you can remember where the parietal lobe is. The parietal lobe. If you're saying that side right here on the side, you got it. Nice job. So, what we're going to talk about today is we're the multimedia principle and how to get those things that we're trying to learn into our long-term memory, and what's the best way to teach in order for our students to be able to remember what we are sharing with them. So our objectives for this video is to define the multimedia principle, describe the principles of contiguity, contrast spatial contiguity and temporal contiguity, and identify violations of spatial contiguity. By the end of this video, I think you're going to be able to achieve all of these things. So first, I want to know, are you familiar with the cognitive theory of multimedia learning? If you can, just let me know somehow here. Use an emoji or, put your pointer on the screen. So let me know. I have not heard about it. I'm somewhat familiar with the concept, or I'm a pro. If you're a pro, hang with me anyway. All right. Okay, so I'm thinking you guys are about between, you've heard about it and you're somewhat familiar with the concept. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching the video. All right, so let's talk about multimedia learning theory. All right, so Dr. Richard Mayer, he is an American educational psychologist. He is known for his contributions to theories of cognition, most widely known for his principles of multimedia learning. The gist of multimedia learning is that people learn more from both words and relevant pictures and graphics than just words alone. Multimedia also encompasses 12 major principles, and we're going to be focusing on the contiguity principles today. So the multimedia learning. Before we go into contiguity, let's first talk about how multimedia learning is processed. Mir identifies three assumptions: dual channel, limited capacity, and active processing. Dual channel processing, as you can see, states we have two separate processing channels, one for visual information that we take in through our eyes, and the other channel is auditory. So this is how we process what we hear. All right. Limited capacity states we can only process a few chunks of information at a time in our working memory. Mir says about 5 to 7 chunks, and some people can do more. Some people have better cognition skills, and so they can retain a little bit more, a higher number on that end of that spectrum. So next, let's talk about active processing. Active processing asserts that we don't learn by passively absorbing information. But I mean, how great would that be, right? So how we learn is by engaging in active cognitive processing. We identify relevant information, organize it, and then integrate it into that knowledge we already have, commonly referred to as that prior knowledge. In short, multimedia presentations filled with words and pictures, it really gets absorbed into our sensory memory through our eyes and ears. But because of that limited capacity, we can only take in so much at a time into our working memory. Once it's in our working memory, we can then integrate that new information with the prior knowledge we have to be stored in our long-term memory, which is where we want it. So let's see what you've learned so far. Multimedia learning states people learn better from words and images. Learning occurs by observation. There are 3 separate processing channels, or unlimited information can be actively processed. Let's see how you did. The correct answer is A. Multimedia learning states people learn better from words and images than from just words alone. Nice job. So let's move on to the next topic. Earlier, I mentioned there are 12 major principles of multimedia learning. We'll be focusing on 2 of them. They are the contiguity principles. And contiguity is essentially the alignment between words and graphics. There's 2 kinds of contiguity. We've got spatial contiguity and temporal contiguity. Spatial contiguity states that text and images are related, and they should be placed in close proximity to each other. So when you hear spatial, think spacing. When images and text are separated, cognitive resources are used, which results in that extraneous processing. Extraneous processing is additional cognitive processing required by unrelated to the learning goal. Remember what we learned earlier about limited capacity. We can only process a few chunks of information at a time in our working memory. If we're too busy processing all the unrelated stuff, what's happening to learning? Remember this example from earlier? First, is it a good example or a bad example of spatial contiguity? If you remember, there was quite a struggle to tie those terms to where they were on the actual picture. So this would be a bad example of spatial contiguity. But do you guys remember how we turned it into a good example? Take a moment to recall what we did to that picture to make it a little bit more manageable. We put those labels directly on the image in close proximity to where they were located. So next we're going to talk about temporal contiguity. According to Mayer, temporal contiguity states people learn more deeply when narration and pictures occur simultaneously instead of successively. Best practice includes speaking to different sections of a slide and revealing them as it's described. Timing is essential here. Give yourself time to explain the element and your audience time to absorb it. Once the audience has seen the graphic in its entirety, you'll be able to use the full form without fear of overload. So let's check out this snippet of video from Rhonda Beercroft.
The Mexican flag is white, red, and green. In the middle of the flag is a symbol made up of an eagle eating a snake, and the eagle sits on a prickly pear cactus. A garland made up of green oak on the left and laurel on the right wraps the bottom.
All right. Are you able to choose which flag based on that video? All right. So let's check our knowledge. We just talked about contiguity. Contiguity occurs when extraneous material is included, cues are added to highlight main ideas, narrated animation is broken into chunks, and there's alignment between words and graphics. The correct answer is D. Contiguity occurs when there's alignment between words and graphics. We have a second question here for you. When narration and pictures occur simultaneously, this is an example of what kind of contiguity? Is it general, spatial, temporal, or principal? The correct answer is C, temporal. When narration and pictures occur simultaneously, this is an example of temporal contiguity. Next, we're going to be moving into common violations and better practices for contiguity. We'll talk a little bit about scrolling screens, isolating images, feedback displayed separately, and using a legend or key. Let's take a look at our first violation. As you can see here, feedback is being displayed consecutively. The learner must toggle between the screens to see what they chose as their correct answer and viewing the actual correct answer. That's a lot of extraneous processing. So what's a better practice look like? You can see here on your screen, the designer has incorporated the correct answer as well as the rationale onto one screen. If you're working in PowerPoint, consider duplicating the slides of the first answer and then adding the correct answer and rationale on the second slide, similar to what I've done in the presentation here. Our second violation is using a legend. Legends are used to indicate specific parts of a graphic. We've seen several examples of that through this video. What cognitive processing does is it increases as the learner looks from the legend to the image. So take a look at this image here. If you were to look at just the image alone, it really doesn't tell you much. But at the same time, if you have to look back and forth to the image and to the legend, it takes up that cognitive processing we were just talking about. A better practice would be to roll over to display descriptions. And I know recently we lost Flash, but it is possible to do it in HTML as well with click boxes. So you can have it pop up. You can have those descriptions pop up, or just integrate that descriptive text onto the screen. Look at this. In one glance, you can see exactly what this process is. So let's finish up with a knowledge check. Katie's asked you to review her presentation, and you see this image. What feedback can you give her for better practice? Right, you probably want to encourage Katie to integrate that text when describing an activity through any use of graphics. All right, this presentation was developed using the lesson plan created as part of the final project for implementation and assessment of multimedia learning. These are the references that we used throughout the presentation. Thank you for your time.